Black consciousness movement leader Stephen Bantu Biko. The struggle hero died in 1977 of severe head trauma on the stone floor of a prison cell in Pretoria at the hands of apartheid forces. For more, we are now joined on the line by Steve Lebelo, an academic, author and historian. Very good evening to you, sir. We thank you very much for your time. Described as the father of Black consciousness movement, as millennials, are we encapsulating the essence of Black consciousness and its movement in the realm of education, youth participation and involvement, and politics and student activism?
Hi, good evening, and good evening to your listeners. Yes, I think, in recent times, there has been a kind of a revival of Black consciousness. And one is actually tempted to think that it is because of the realization that, the post-apartheid or post-1994 dispensation is actually producing more continuities than change, as compared to the previous dispensation. And this kind of a perception is particularly widespread among young people. But, because we are talking about the legacy of Steve Biko, and we are reflecting on nearly, 41 years since his death, so much has actually happened. And part of what, the challenges that we are faced with is probably to reconstruct, the original idea and get to understand that, if these ideas were relevant in the particular context, of the end of the 60s and throughout the 70s, how is it that, over time they have been marginalized, particularly in public intellectual discourse.
Definitely.
And because the question, pardon?
Continue, sir.
Yes, but because the question hasn't been posed, we are unable to appreciate the extent to which Biko's ideas had such an impact, that the apartheid state was terribly uncomfortable about that. But we seem to think, that it is only the apartheid state that would have been particularly concerned. On the other hand, there was what we call the liberal tradition in South Africa, which Steve was able to chastise, for getting involved in Black politics. And, it is the reaction of that particular segment of society that has been underrepresented in the historical narrative. And because we haven't been able to appreciate that and understand its impact, on Black consciousness, we are unable to account for the demise of Black consciousness in the 1980s and early 1990s. And because we are unable to give that account, we are therefore unable to explain, Azapo's poor showing, in electoral politics.
Definitely, in terms of his ideologies and his narratives, of which you just spoke about, he wrote about how Black consciousness includes the realization of the Black man to rally with brothers around the cause of their oppression. If we look at some of the recent events that we're seeing, like the calling out of racism, specifically on social media, is Black consciousness being emulated today?
Is it any relevant? Yes, it is. Like I said, part of what I said at the beginning is that because part of what we see today is more elements of continuity than change. And if that is the case, then it means that in essential characteristics, white supremacy is just as intact as it probably was at the time when Steve Biko started, commenting on it. But we do know that a great deal has happened in between, and we'd love to think that there has been some material changes, to the extent that, whatever racism that there could have been has been attenuated, over an extended period of time. But I think, a more closer examination, of the current dispensation suggests that a great deal still needs to be done. The fact that young Black people making any kind of demand at all, whether it is, fees must fall or whether it is free education, it is therefore, precisely because the understanding is that, symbols and elements of oppression, as they were in the 60s and 70s, appear to be still manifest today. And this is why the only source of inspiration could actually become black consciousness. But like I say, it is a kind of black consciousness that is attenuated precisely because it has lost touch, with what the original idea was and how it would be able to deal with today's challenges.
Indeed, we thank you very much for your time this evening. Would love to have continued this conversation a bit further. That was Steve Lebelo, academic, author and historian around the anniversary of the